dream. One day, this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
Black Men Thinkin'.
Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. The only way they can inherit the freedom we have known is if we fight for it, protect it, defend it, and then hand it to them with the well-taught lessons of how they in their lifetime must do the same.
Black Men Thinkin'.
Anytime you throw your weight behind a political party that controls 2/3 of the government, and that party can't keep the promise that it made to you during election time, and you are dumb enough to walk around continuing to identify yourself with that party, you're not only a chump, but you're a traitor to your race.
Black Men Thinkin'.
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. And this idea that government is beholden to the people, that it has no other source of power except the sovereign people, is still the newest and the most unique idea in all the long history of man's relation to man. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
Black Men Thinkin'.
In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem.
Black Men Thinkin'.
Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking, here on the dominant force of internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM, Valdosta, Georgia. WJHC, Talk 107.5, North Florida Talk Radio, FreedomInAmericaRadio.com, and WLBB News Talk AM 1330 in Carrollton, Georgia. Happy to be with you. Just want to apologize in advance if you notice anything different about my mannerism on this broadcast. I did have to put down my pet dog this weekend, and I'm having some effects. It was not an easy experience. Nevertheless, we press on. Democrats are making an electoral mountain out of a relative molehill. The week of the 6th of November, there were gubernatorial races in Virginia, in New Jersey, and an important mayoral race in Charlotte, North Carolina. All of those were won by Democrats. And as a result, the Democrats are just exceedingly happy. They're beside themselves. They believe they're on the comeback trail. I'm not sure that's exactly true. Washington Examiner put out a opinion piece on the 11th saying that the media was overplaying the Democrat election wins. And quoting here, anyone with the thinnest knowledge of politics knew that Democrats would almost certainly win the governor races in New Jersey and Virginia, and that they were likely to win the mayoral race in Charlotte, North Carolina. Both of Virginia's U.S. senators are Democrats, and the state voted for Hillary Clinton in 2016 and for Obama in 2012 and 2008. The same could be said for New Jersey. And though the state has had a Republican governor for 2 terms, it is Chris Christie whose approval this summer was as low as 15%. In the case of Charlotte, they hadn't had a Republican mayor since 2009. Their last 5 mayors have all been Democrats. Nevertheless, the media toasted to these victories the way a child might cheer after bowling a strike aided by gutter bumpers. New York Times also put out an opinion piece regarding this, saying the reality is the Democratic victories occurred almost entirely in areas that had voted for Hillary Clinton. In Trump country, they continue to struggle. Outside of highly educated suburbs and racially diverse cities, Democrats still do not have an effective response to Trumpism, and they need one. To build a national coalition, Democrats have to do better in whiter, more rural areas. Virginia, the focus of attention last week in a blue-leaning state, highlights both the good and the bad. The Democratic margins in suburbs and cities were smashing thanks to a surge in turnout. Elsewhere, though, the situation was very different. Ralph Northam, the Democratic governor-elect, didn't only lose outside of the big metropolitan areas and badly, he lost by more than the previous Democratic nominee, Governor Terry McAuliffe, had in 2013. Of Virginia's 133 counties and cities, Northam fared worse than McAuliffe in 89 of them. Let me break that down for you. The Democrat Party won where they were expected to win, but by less than they normally do. Nevertheless, Keith Ellison showed up in a piece in The Atlantic saying that these victories, among other things, in his opinion, meant that the Democrats were on the road to reclaiming the House and the Senate in 2018. Now that's interesting to me because back in June of this year, he was offering a pretty weak explanation for what had happened in the last election to Joe Scarborough and his group on MSNBC.
Julia.
Congressman Ellis, looking ahead at Ellison, we're looking at ahead of 2018, and a lot of people are saying that the map is just not in the Democrats' favor. How do you feel going into that? How do you overcome that hurdle?
I never believe stuff like that. I mean, I think, if you get in there and fight and you talk to people all over this country, you go to the Union Hall, the VFW Hall, the church basement, the synagogue, the mosque, you talk to Americans, you can change all the prognosticators' predictions. You got to get in there. You got to get face to face and build a relationship.
Okay, Congressman, I just wanted to ask you about Hillary Clinton's comments. She had very harsh words for the support that the DNC gave her. What do you make of that?
Well, let me tell you, man, we're looking forward. We're looking ahead. And the truth is, we do need to do some improving. A little bit of criticism doesn't hurt us. We need to take it seriously and move out on what we have learned.
Shouldn't she also take responsibility for what she did? She didn't seem to.
Let me tell you, Hillary Clinton is a wonderful American. I think she's a wonderful person to serve this country, and we need everybody's help to go inspire voters all over this country. So I'm not looking back. I'm looking forward, and we're trying to employ everyone. Hillary Clinton, too.
I'm actually interested in information, though.
It's not platitudes.
She says it was bankrupt. She says it was totally disorganized. She says it was a complete mess. Is that the case?
They didn't give her anything.
They didn't give her anything. Is that true?
Let me tell you, we can't relitigate the past. I know that folks want to get into that stuff, but the truth is, seriously, let me finish my point. The truth is that Trump is abandoning climate action. He is taking away people's protection from pre-existing conditions. He is trying to ban people based on the religion. There is no time for us to go back and try to figure out who shot John. We've got to figure out what went wrong so we can fix it and then move forward in an aggressive way. That's where I'm at.
All
right. Congressman Keith Ellison, I said thank you so much for being with us. We greatly appreciate it. We're waiting the question and answer.
Did you hear the part that I find most interesting? There's not one policy statement in there. You got to get in there and talk to people and build relationships. That is the Democrat message and has been as long as I have been alive. It's not about policy. It's about getting in there and talking to people, shaking their hands and letting them know who you are and telling them that you care about their problems. You don't have a prescription for their problems. You say the same thing that Ellison said. We got to get in there and we got to build relationships. And that way when election day comes around, all they know is that they shook your hand and they may not have seen the other guy, and so they vote for you. And the result of that in Democratic-held areas, particularly those in the minority community, is devastating. That is why Detroit was declared the largest municipal bankruptcy in world history, if not just U.S. history. That's why Baltimore is the nation's capital for heroin use, with 10% of the population, not just 10% of the adult population, but 10% of its population, 1 in every 10 residents being someone who uses heroin. It's why Chicago is what it is. That's what happens when you do the Democrat way, which I'm not going to say is ineffective. That would be unfair. It is effective. It's effectively wrong. But this is what we're getting. Something else came up, and I want to deal with this. The polls are favoring the Democrats, supposedly. The Hill reporting back on the 6th of November that the Democrats lead by 11 points on the generic House ballot. On the 17th of October, it was a 14-point lead, so I guess it's coming down. Fox News poll had the Democrats leading by 15 points on the ballot. Let me tell you something about polls. In this most recent age of politics in America, the polls had an electoral landslide for Hillary Clinton last November 8th. She lost. Her opponent got more than 300 electoral votes out of 538. More than 300. So, am I supposed to believe? These are the same polls that now keep saying that Donald Trump is an unpopular president. These are the same polls that are now, same pollsters that are now saying the Democrats hold these leads. My question is, why would you believe this? Well, because Donald Trump is terrible. To whom? To the media? Yeah, he's death on the media. And the media don't like him, and progressives don't like him. But he won the presidency with more than 300 electoral votes. Well, he didn't win the popular vote. Nobody gets elected president in the United States based on the popular vote. That's why we have an electoral system, so that the popular vote cannot prevail. It's not like the founders didn't know stuff like this was likely to occur. Abraham Lincoln in 1860 didn't win the popular vote. He won less than 40% of the vote. But he won the Electoral College. That's all that matters. The system has been the way it has been since they put it up to begin with. The Electoral College is out there with the Constitution. So basically, it was they came up with it in 1787, put it in effect in 1789, and that's the system we've had. So it's not that Hillary Clinton's loss of the popular vote, winning the popular vote, not winning the presidency, is something that's some shock. You have to win the Electoral College. Pretty simple. So I don't believe the polls. I really don't. Now, the other thing that's coming up, you see these polls, let me tell you, there are two polls, to the extent that polls matter, that actually count for anything. One is the one that's taken on Election Day. That matters because you count those votes, and whoever gets that wins. And that's the end of that discussion. The other poll of a type that matters deals with fundraising. Did you know that the GOP, the Republicans, raising millions more than the DNC as recently as July? The Republicans have more money. Well, Donald Trump proved that just because you have the most money doesn't mean you're going to win the election because Hillary had more money than he did. Yes, but the only way Democrats win is by building relationships and then having enough money to put out a message that is so disparaging to the other side that you don't notice that they have no policy. Democrats need money to win election because they have no policies. And now they don't have the money that the GOP has. So the Republicans could run the same type of campaign that the Democrats do and make the Democrats even less effective than they are. Let's not forget that the Democrat Party's been bleeding and hemorrhaging elected office seats since 2009. More than 1,000 if you count state legislative seats, gubernatorial seats, House seats, Senate seats, more than 1,000 elected offices that did sit in the hands of Democrats are now in the hands of Republicans. And you think that Donald Trump caused this? No, the Democrat Party caused this. Let's make this clear. Democrats are desperate to maintain relevancy as a national party. And that's why for them, winning the governor's races in Virginia and New Jersey were critical. Because if by some miracle they had lost them, it would have sounded the death knell a little bit early. Particularly had they lost in Virginia, when most of the residents are in Northern Virginia, in D.C., and nobody's voting against their interests in D.C. And if you vote for Republicans in the D.C. area, you're stopping the gravy train, particularly for all those federal workers. They're not trying to do all that. They won where they normally win, by smaller margins than they normally win. They still have no message. They're still apologizing. And now you have the blue-haired one, Donna Brazile, out there blasting folks for the fact that they rigged their nomination process. They are in disarray. They have no money. Their whole theme is Donald Trump is bad. Donald Trump is bad. What happened to the better deal that they were talking about back in July? Anybody heard about that? Haven't heard of it. They had a big rollout, and it went over like a lead balloon. And there's a reason for it. I don't know what's going to happen in 2018. A whole lot of things can happen. But right now, the trend is strongly against the Democrat Party, which happens to be a very good thing for the country. What you'll hear somewhat in 2018 and more in 2020 is what has occurred since Barack Obama left office. And it's a triumph for the American people, for the American economy, and for Americanism. It's a great thing that that guy is gone. It's an even better thing that he wasn't replaced with someone with even less of a moral conscience than he had. Let's make no mistake, Barack Obama is a morally bankrupt man. But he is the Pope morally in comparison to anyone surnamed Clinton in American politics. Well, Donald Trump he's been divorced, he chased women, he did. Yeah. You really want to go there with someone who was married to Bill Clinton? You really want to talk about somebody's morality and ethics with someone who talks to you about what the definition of is? Seriously? The Democrats won a couple of gubernatorial races that they were supposed to win. They didn't win them by as much as they should have won them. They still have a problem because the nation's economy is getting better under Donald Trump. And at the end of the day, if Americans go back to work, there's not a doggone thing the Democrats will be able to do. And if he's able to bring about economic prosperity in his first year that Barack Obama couldn't bring about in all 8 years he was in office, and he can continue that, then I don't know what could get a Democrat elected in 2020. They're going to have to do some real work to make a real difference in 2018, the Democrats, that is. And that begins with having a message that somebody wants to hear. Nobody cares about who you aren't or who you don't like. They want to know what it is that you believe should be done and how, and what does it take of them for your program to get over. The Democrats don't know how to do that. They stopped doing that decades ago. And I don't think they're going to figure out how to do it again in 12 months. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinkin', will be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinkin', here on the dominant force of internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us, also WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia, WJHC, Talk 107.5 FM in North Florida, FreedomInAmericaRadio.com, and WLBB News Talk AM 1330 in Carrollton, Georgia. Moving on to, let's just call it sunlight, or more appropriately, Trump light, is shining on more of the D.C. swamp now than we had known about previously. So the only way to describe this is just strange. CNN ran a story, and this is Congress paid out $17 million in settlements. And this is going back to the 1990s. Now, Jackie Speier, a congresswoman from California, a Democrat, who's been in Congress since 2008, so she was not around when Congress set up this fund, came out with a statement regarding it, and here's what she had to say.
In the last 20 years, there have been 260 settlements at a cost to the taxpayers of this country of $15 million. That $15 million has been there to silence victims of all types of workplace discrimination. Today, we are here to change that. Abusers and sexual predators have thrived in the shadows in our current system where all the power is deliberately taken away from the survivor.
Congresswoman, I wanted to ask you again, just following on that transparency question. In the new bill, you will list members' offices in the settlement. How hard do you think it's going to be to convince fellow members to support that particular sort of thing that people might balk at?
Well, no one should balk at it because there shouldn't be an office in the Capitol that is engaged in this kind of conduct. And if you are engaged in this kind of conduct or you are allowing this kind of conduct to go on unabated in your office, then you should be called in.
That all sounds wonderful. So up to this point, when these payments were made, there was not transparency, so to speak, so that you would know which congressional office was involved, which congressperson, senator, or representative. You didn't know. And you still don't seem to know, even though $17 million have been paid out over the past 20-something years, between 1997 and 2017. Here's the question. Before Donald Trump got elected, how much did you even hear about this? This is what I mean. People are finding stuff out that I guarantee you wouldn't have found out had Hillary Clinton been elected president. This was not going to show up. I can tell you that right now. It's showing up now because of who won the election. It's not a comforting thing for people. But the worst part about it is, how is it that once you get elected to Congress, if you do something that causes a lawsuit to be filed against you or against your office, you can use the taxpayers' money, because that's where this money is coming from, by the way. From the story, this past Thursday, on the 16th, the Office of Compliance released additional information indicating that it has paid victims more than $17 million since its creation in the 1990s. Now, of course, in the 1990s, Bill Clinton was president, and the Democrats ran the House and the Senate. Well, that's not true, because in 1994, the Republicans took control of both houses of Congress, and these payments didn't begin until 1997. So when people tell you within D.C., within that beltway, which is a statement I make often, the difference between Democrat and Republican is what again? Because you had the most corrupt man second most corrupt man to be president in the White House in 1997. But the Speaker of the House and the majority in the House and Senate were Republican. And now you set this thing up. Wow. An Office of Compliance spokeswoman said the office was releasing the extra data due to interest in the awards and settlement figures. They had come under fire in recent days for what lawmakers and Hill aides alike say are its antiquated policies that do not adequately protect victims who file complaints. What about not creating victims who file complaints, Congress people? When was the money paid out? 1997 to 2017. How many settlements? 268. Where does the settlement money come from? The taxpayers. Once a settlement is reached, the money is not paid out of an individual lawmaker's office, but rather comes out of a special fund set up to handle this within the U.S. Treasury, meaning taxpayers are footing the bill. The fund was set up by the Congressional Accountability Act, the 1995 law, 1995. Thank you, Mr. Gingrich. That created the Office of Compliance. Now, how many of these settlements were sexual harassment related? They don't know that, because the settlements were made regarding all kinds of violations, one way or the other, whether they could be racial, they could be religious, disability, and there's no public breakdown of the settlement types. Who knows about these settlements? After a settlement is reached, a payment must be approved by the chairman and ranking member of the House Administration Committee. In other words, a Republican and a Democrat, no. The aide also said that since becoming chairman of the committee, Chairman Harper has not received any settlement requests. Harper became chairman of the panel at the beginning of this year. And that was Mississippi Republican Greg Harper. So there haven't been any this year so far. So they have a slush fund in the U.S. Treasury to pay off people who allege harassment against Congress members. They don't pay it out of their office. They pay it with your money out of the U.S. Treasury. This might explain what happened with one former House Speaker from the GOP.
Not guilty is the plea this morning from former House Speaker Dennis Hastert. He appeared in federal court yesterday for his arraignment on federal charges. They stem from his alleged attempts to cover up past sexual misconduct with hush money. Dean Reynolds is at the United States District Court in Chicago with Hastert's next steps. Dean, good morning.
Good morning. Well, here at the federal courthouse, we got our first good look at Dennis Hastert since his indictment, and he was unsteady and at times bewildered. A far cry from the powerful man he once was.
Mr. Hastert, what do you have to say to the people of Illinois? Hastert fought through cameras as he arrived for his arraignment at the federal courthouse in Chicago. The man who was once second in line to the presidency spoke in almost a whisper, with his attorney entering a plea of not guilty to all charges. He was freed on a $4,500 bond and forced to surrender his passport, submit to DNA samples upon request, and banned from possessing any firearms. Neither Hastert nor his attorneys addressed the media after the 20-minute arraignment. According to the indictment, the former speaker faces charges of lying to federal investigators and hiding bank transactions as part of a plan to pay $3.5 million in hush money to one of his victims for past misconduct. Federal sources have said the misconduct is sexual in nature, and the victim, only known as Individual A, was a student at Yorkville High School in Illinois, where Hastert was a teacher and wrestling coach between 1965 and 1981. Legal analyst Irv Miller, who described the speaker as a shell of a man in court, says the plea is no surprise, but Hastert faces an uphill battle.
A lot of people out there thought he'd walk into court and admit the error of his ways, take that first step towards rehabilitation and, admit you were wrong. Everybody's seen the evidence in the case, these transactions, and the first question is, how's he going to beat this?
Now, we won't know the answer to that for a while. The defense could be preparing to go to trial or working on some kind of settlement. In any case, if convicted on those charges, Hastert could face 10 years in prison and a $500,000 fine. Charlie? Dean, thanks.
Well, he was convicted last year in 2016, and he got 15 months and a fine. My question comes down to this. When I look at the CNN story talking about this fund and this other story from 2015 of Denny Hastert's indictment, which led to a conviction. Where does somebody who makes less than $200,000 come up with $3.5 million to pay anybody? Oh, that's right. Back in 1995, and Hastert, I believe, was in Congress in 1995, the Republicans put on Bill Clinton's desk a law that set up a slush fund in the U.S. Treasury to pay off lawsuits filed against members of Congress. Wow. Hush money. Once the settlement gets approved, the interesting thing to me about this, several interesting things to me about this. When the press asked the question, why don't you know about this? The first thing you have to remember is that they did know about it. That's their job. Washington reporters follow every piece of legislation. They know whatever is coming down the pike. They know who supports it. They know why. They have an understanding, incomplete as it may be, but they have an understanding of why it's going to be there. But no one told you about this in 1995. And no one's told you about the payouts until now. 22 years later, you're finding out about the payouts, and you're finding out that instead of these people taking accountability, public accountability, because they're the ones being sued, they are basically dipping into your treasury, into your piggy bank, and paying off people who have sued them. That's one thing. The other thing is by having Jackie Speier come out and to focus on people like Denny Hastert, to focus on people like Senator Franken, to focus on others like that. You notice they have an interesting commonality. They all have a Y chromosome. You don't find that convenient? I do. I find it interesting that when we start talking about payouts and harassment, the implication, even though if you read the story, they do give you reason to believe that, well, we really don't know. But the implication is that this is people being paid to be quiet about men in Washington, D.C. sexually harassing them. What happens if the data comes out and you find out that only a quarter, only a third, or less than half of all the claims have anything to do with sexual harassment? What do? Well, it doesn't matter now because we've put that out there in this environment where everybody is convinced that every man is a sexual predator. That's what we have. And if you don't believe me, ask any female whether or not men are sexual predators, and they will be happy to oblige you by recalling all their stories. Remember the hashtag #MeToo thing that was going on, and is still going on to some extent. This is about making sure the swamp is revealed, which in and of itself is a good thing. But progressives and globalists will never let a crisis go to waste. And you have to ask yourself, what is it that they plan to do with this one? Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinkin'. We'll be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinkin', here on the dominant force of internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also WDDQ Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia. WJHC Talk 107.5 North Florida Talk Radio, Freedom in AmericaRadio.com, and WLBB News Talk AM 1330 in Carrollton, Georgia. Now, with all the things that have been flying around recently that seem to be a confluence, and maybe it's accidental, of course there's very little accidental in things of this manner. And what I'm talking about is all the sexual assault, all these things coming up. They have something in common, several things in common. It is consistently men who are put forward as the abusers, consistently allegations that are too old to be proved, or people who are unwilling to provide any information that could validate the allegations. They don't have it, or they're not willing to produce it. And the other thing, of course, is you leave these men out there hanging. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to say that there is not an issue. I'm not going to go as far to say it's a problem. The truth of the matter is we simply don't know. We don't know how big a problem sexual assault is in the country. We do know what type of a problem it is in certain industries and certain segments of society, most specifically politics and entertainment. We do know that we have a significant issue there that we do not seem willing to address. And in part of not addressing it, we have gone so far as to walk away from what constitutional protections people have. When a woman accuses a man of anything, no matter what it is, no matter how long ago it is, whether or not she is credible or can offer anything to substantiate what she's saying, the presumption of innocence is all but gone out of the window. We're seeing that now with Roy Moore, who's running for Senate in Alabama. We saw that all the way back in 1990 with Clarence Thomas when he was going for the Supreme Court. We see that with Herman Cain. We see that with others. Now, when you move over to what we're seeing lately, which is as many, if not sometimes more, people who lean left politically. For example, Russell Simmons just got accused of raping somebody back in 1991 while a movie producer watched. Was it 1991 or 1981? One of those two. 1991. While Brett Ratner watched and did nothing to help. So she's going after two guys, whoever this is. And the interesting thing, of course, is the accuser is rarely named. The accuser has the option of remaining anonymous, but they always want to run the man's name. I find it fascinating because we've been hearing about the war on women for all this time, but what you are watching is a war on men right now. And it is across the board. It seemed to be at a time just for men who were right of center, and it crossed the line. The exemptions, the primary exemption was Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton still hasn't answered for his more than 4-decade reign of rape. He hasn't answered for that yet. And of course now he's getting so old it doesn't matter to the point where what are you going to get from him? He's going to die anyway. If you look at him, he looks dead already. But that was the exception. Everybody else, now Al Franken of all people, you have a picture of him groping some woman who seems to be asleep. And she came out this week and was singing like a bird on CNN, only to say, oh, I forgive him because he apologized. Really? Okay. They had Franken on film. It would have been kind of difficult for him to kind of say that it didn't happen. But these other men that they're accusing, who are standing firm, oh yeah, but they got Cosby. They got Cosby on what? That trial did not work out against him, if I recall. But we know he did it. How do you know? This is why you have trials. And the trial did not conclude that he had committed a crime. I don't even think he was tried for criminal activity. Well, what he did was wrong. But you still don't know what he did. That doesn't matter. That was another very powerful man that was taken down. We're going after men. Russell Simmons, of all people, you're going after him. Harvey Weinstein, creep. But that was an open secret for decades. What was the reason now for taking him down? The mess that's in Hollywood has always been that way. And people who were more concerned about their opportunity than their morality always looked the other way when they were abused or when they knew that others were abused because they wanted to have their shot. Now all of a sudden we have a movement where it seems like every woman in America has a story about how she was taken advantage of, which makes the implication that all men are bad and that only women are good people who should be in power because every man in power is corrupt. Really? Well, we do have some rather interesting high-profile examples of some corrupt women. Here's one example that was in the public eye, but the mainstream media kept taking that public eye and trying to focus it elsewhere.
This story, a lot of other people are not. We told you about a tech worker for Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz who was arrested and charged with bank fraud. He was caught trying to leave the country. The mainstream media has just not touched this story almost at all. Joining us now is Kristen. Kristen, why is there something going on behind the scenes here with this story that makes the establishment media just walk away from it?
You know, this is an amazing story of D.C. corruption story, and yet the mainstream media won't cover it. And that's because the mainstream media is a permanent fixture of the D.C. swamp. But this story is so strange. This tech worker, Awan, was charged with felony bank fraud months ago and banned from the House computer system, and yet Debbie Wasserman Schultz kept him on the taxpayer-funded payroll until Tuesday when he was arrested trying to flee the country. Not only that, but she threatened Capitol Police because they seized one of Awan's computers. She wanted them to return that computer. So all of this begs the question, why did Debbie Wasserman Schultz keep this man on the payroll for so long? I think something much bigger is going on here, and I think that there is something on that computer, on that seized computer, that terrifies Wasserman Schultz, and she does not want that exposed to the public.
So Debbie Wasserman Schultz is corrupt. That's hardly a surprise. I think you knew that from last summer. As a result, you also know that Donna Brazile is corrupt. You know that. Did you also know that Corrine Brown, former Jacksonville, Florida area congresswoman, is corrupt? She was convicted back in May of 18 counts of fraud and corruption. Prosecutors are now trying to put her away for a number of years. She had a sentencing hearing, I believe, this past week, or it at least began. How come you're not hearing about that? Is that any less corrupt? How come Donna Brazile is actually getting a pass for revealing the corruption in the DNC of which she was part and parcel? And then, of course, there's always the queen of corruption, Hillary Clinton, Crooked Hillary, as President Donald Trump called her during the campaign. The problem is, this is the interesting thing about Donald Trump. When he labels somebody, it turns out to be exactly true, because Donald Trump has sources and he knows things that other people tend not to know. He just puts them out there in a way that, you know what, you're going to trip over this anyway. I'm just going to put it out there. But what women will come back and say, but you're not acknowledging the horror of all the sexual assault that men do. All the sexual assault that men do. Really? What about the sexual assault that women do?
When you think of sexual predators, you likely think of some creepy-looking guy who gets his thrills chasing little kids. Sure, men are the predominant offenders, but this crime is still perpetrated by both sexes. That's right, sexual predators come in all shapes and sexes. From the sweet elementary school teacher to that nice lady who lives across the street, these examples show that women can be just as terrible as men. Leah Shipman. When we hear about female sexual predators, they tend to usually involve a female teacher and her male students. Leah Shipman was one of these classic cases. In 2009, Shipman allegedly became involved with Johnny Ison, one of her students who was just 15 years old. When authorities found out, she was arrested and fired from her position. Yet in a twist, in 2011, she married Ison, and the case against her was dropped. Why? Because under North Carolina law, a spouse cannot testify against their partner. Courtney Reschke. This mom is definitely one to avoid on Facebook. That's because in 2012, Courtney Reschke used social media to lure her own son's friends over to the house. Once there, she would get them drunk and engage in what were described as sex parties. Unfortunately for Reschke, the authorities tend to frown on adults who have sex with minors, and she was arrested. Initially pleading not guilty, this irresponsible mother of three later accepted a deal that will see her spend at least 3 years behind bars. Gemma Barker. As the case of Gemma Barker demonstrates, even women pretend to be someone else online in order to target victims. In 2009, Barker, just 19 at the time, used Facebook to meet 2 girls and convince them she was a man. When the time to meet came, she went so far as to disguise herself as a man in order to engage in sexual activities. Hiding the fact that she was a woman, Barker kept everything a secret until she was recognized by one of the victims online. She is now serving a 2.5-year sentence for her crimes. Beth Modica. This 44-year-old was a former prosecutor and wife of the local police chief, not someone you typically expect to be a potential sex offender. Yet Modica took a liking to her son's classmates and one weekend engaged in sex with 2 of them. When the details later came out, it was revealed that she had also been involved in drug and alcohol-fueled activities with 5 other boys, all 15 and 16 years of age. In 2008, this disgraced mother was sentenced to 2 years in jail and 10 years probation. Sarah Hopkins. Sarah Hopkins was a 35-year-old who, unfortunately, was into men a lot younger than her. She became friends with the 11-year-old son of her neighbor, and what seemed harmless at first quickly went bad. Hopkins would spend considerable time with the boy, often going for walks or hanging out in her apartment. Before long, she was showing him pornographic movies and initiating sexual activities. When the boy eventually told his mother, Hopkins was arrested and sentenced to 12 years behind bars. Jennifer Rice. When you're an elementary school teacher, being friendly with your students is one thing. Sending them emails and going on movie dates is a whole other deal. Jennifer Rice did that with one of her 11-year-old students. When the parents stepped in, Rice kidnapped the boy and reportedly assaulted him while on the run. Later investigations concluded that she had been involved with the boy's older brother as well. In the end, this predator was sentenced to 25 years behind bars. Hendrika Shasky. This New Zealand teacher became an infamous sexual predator thanks to her scheme to effectively pry a boy away from his parents. Hendrika Shasky saw that one of her students, Aaron Gilmore, wasn't too close to his own mother. She moved in and befriended the 11-year-old. Over the following years, after winning his trust, she repeatedly assaulted him and kept it hidden from the boy's family. For years, this went on until Gilmore turned 18 and moved out and away from the situation. Shasky didn't get away with it, however, and she's now serving a 10-year sentence. Ashley Jessup. Children count on their moms to provide and protect them. Ashley Jessup clearly didn't get that memo and is now serving life in prison. The Ohio resident made the disturbing choice to sexually assault her own son, specifically when he was just 10 months old. Needless to say, the judge didn't have any trouble taking the child away from her or making sure that she was handed a heavy sentence. Joyce McKinney. Joyce McKinney was a former beauty queen with a high IQ, not someone you'd peg as a sexual predator. In the late 1970s, the 25-year-old McKinney met 19-year-old Mormon Kirk Anderson, and the two had a very brief affair. Anderson then headed off to England, but the beauty queen wasn't set to end things. She hired a private eye to track down Anderson, where she eventually kidnapped him, tied him to a bed, and repeatedly sexually assaulted him. In 1984, police caught McKinney in what was believed to be another attempt to kidnap Anderson outside his Utah office. Barbara Ellen Kirby. Age is just a number. Well, a lot of people live by this credo. Barbara Ellen Kirby decided it made having sex with 13 and 12-year-old boys okay. In 2014, the 36-year-old was arrested after allegedly giving alcohol and drugs to boys before trying to sexually assault them. The victims often reported that Kirby performed sexual acts in front of them with another unidentified man while the alcohol and drugs took effect. In order to keep everything a secret, she also made sure to threaten the boys not to tell.
That is sobering. Also sobering was a report by The Independent. Back in July of this year, female sex offenders are more common than you think. A U.S. study has revealed that female sex offenders are more common than first thought. Here's one of the things that came up. A 2010 survey showed results estimating that nearly 4.5 million men in the U.S. had at some stage in their lives been forced to sexually penetrate another person, and that in 79.2% of cases, the perpetrator forcing the sexual act was a woman. 80%. Wow. 4.5 million men. Now that goes along with the epidemic, it almost seems, of teachers, female teachers, taking advantage of teenage boys. Now, I know the stereotype goes the other way. It's like, well, if a woman's trying to... I understand all that. But the whole thing is, the same sickness that you attribute to men is there in women in spades. Stempel's team is another part of this research team being talked about in this independent article. Also considered data from the U.S. Census Bureau, which revealed that in 2012, a study of a percentage women and men who were admitted to forcing sex found that 43%, almost 44% of those who admitted to forcing sex were women. Yeah, the other 56% were men. But 44% of them were women. 79% of those who perpetrate sexual assault against men are women. We're not talking about this. Why? Because this part is my opinion. Because the whole idea is to disrupt the culture by perpetrating and endorsing into the culture that men in power cannot be trusted. Now go tell that to the parents of a teenage boy who they don't know what to do with because his mind is messed up because some 30-something-year-old teacher, if she was even that old, decided that he needed to be her boy toy and tell me that there's no problem here. There is a problem. It's a hypocritical thing for women to go out and complain about that which they know is going on, which they know that many among them do, but never want to shine the light on that because that would be against the creed of feminism. There's a war on men, and by broadening that war to attack liberals and progressives and everyone else, you're finding out just how intent those who want to disrupt the culture are on delegitimizing male leadership within it. I'm going to turn this over to my good friend Ron Edwards, and after that we'll be back with hour 2 of Black Man Thinking.
Abraham Lincoln said that America would not be destroyed by external forces. Unfortunately, there are numerous internal efforts to implode our republic. Hello, I'm Ron Edwards. On today's page from the Edwards Notebook, I am amazed at the number of local, state, and federal government officials who are enamored with the policies and principles that could literally lead to the destruction of America. About 4 years ago, a Middle East Christian minister asked my wife and I, considering the hatred of Muslims towards black people, why do so many blacks flock to the Islamic dogma? The best we could come up with was that black Americans are indoctrinated to be bitter against America and to support any movement that is destructive to the USA. Even Columbus, Ohio, a thriving, growing city, has joined the ranks of appeasing our enemies. Now that they have elected a black Democrat mayor and a leftist city council, they have launched a defense fund for both the Islamic Care movement and the Columbus Families Together Fund to assist illegal immigrants in their effort to permanently remain in the United States of America, despite the fact many do not even like our nation and do not wish to assimilate into American society. Looks like part of an effort to destroy America from within, to me. What say you? I'm Ron Edwards.
Sponsored by the Tri-County Liberty Coalition.
I have a dream. One day, this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
Black Men Thinkin'.
Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. The only way they can inherit the freedom we have known is if we fight for it, protect it, defend it, and then hand it to them with the well-taught lessons of how they in their lifetime must do the same.
Black Man Thinkin.
Anytime you throw your weight behind a political party that controls 2/3 of the government, and that party can't keep the promise that it made to you during election time, and you are dumb enough to walk around continuing to identify yourself with that party, you're not only a chump, but you're a traitor to your race.
Black Man Thinkin.
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. And this idea that government is beholden to the people, that it has no other source of power except the sovereign people, is still the newest and the most unique idea in all the long history of man's relation to man. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
Black Man Thinkin.
In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem.
Black Man Thinkin.
Stanley Levy here with Hour 2 of Black Man Thinkin on the dominant force of the Internet conservative, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia. WJHC, Talk 107.5 FM in North Florida. Freedom in AmericaRadio.com. And WLBB News Talk AM 1330 in Carrollton, Georgia. So just when you thought it was safe to stop talking about Colin Kaepernick when the Kaeprernick'n was done, it just keeps getting better. The fall of this guy as an activist is definitely more interesting and exciting than his play as a quarterback. What am I talking about? When you start looking at Colin Kaepernick, you really start finding all the interesting decisions that indicate this dude has no judgment whatsoever. Well, let's do it this way. What can we say about Colin Kaepernick? Well, and this is not something I can blame him for. It's not his fault at all. He has a white birth mother. He has a white adoptive mother. This is the whitest guy that I know trying to out Sean King. He has a pet tortoise. Well, how do you know he still has it? Those things don't die. Those things will outlive you. If he had it, it probably still is here. Unless he's going to disown his tortoise. Did he take a knee on the tortoise too? I don't think so. We know he has unusual taste in socks. For me, when I played football, I didn't wear colored socks on the football field. The socks were white for the very simple reason that if something happened, and I was bleeding, I didn't want any dye from the socks getting into the cut or whatever the wound was. But this dude shows up at an NFL practice with socks on that depict police officers as pigs. But of course, his protest has nothing to do with disrespecting law enforcement. Yeah, the judgment or lack thereof. He has mastered the vacant stare. I have not seen anyone look less intelligent with a camera on. He is the human embodiment of a deer in headlights when they put cameras on him. When he starts talking, he can't focus on anything or anyone. He stares off into space vacantly. It's just amazing. He's got it down, though. Got it down. To the point where nobody actually even checks him on it. They don't even ask him about it. Just like they didn't ask Obama about his stuttering. And that dude, yeah. He lucked up on the only non-ugly heterosexual female, it would appear, in all of Black Lives Matter. Interestingly enough, for her to call herself black is actually cultural appropriation of the First Order. Nessa Diab is Arab. She's not black. She's Arab. She's just a couple of shades removed from Rachel Dolezal. She just doesn't need to get a paint job to pass. She can pass as black, though she's not, just by saying it. Say, don't I look it? I think I'm black. So what I have is Colin Kaepernick, who ain't black, hanging out with this other girl who's with Black Lives Matter, and she ain't black. Both of them trying to perpetrate a fraud of a protest dealing with black folks, and neither one of them are black. And it's falling apart as we speak. But as it falls apart, it has done significant financial damage to the National Football League. It's fascinating. And now, of course, when people were coming to him, real financial people ready to find a way to get money for the things, get money to him to help him accomplish his goals and objectives of activism. Real activists, professional activists who honestly knew how to take ideas and turn them into efforts and maybe even programs. When they approached him, said, Colin, man, you done started something. We want to work with you and get this program over. The cricket choir showed up in his house. He's yet to be heard from about it because he's not going to do it. See, this is the interesting thing. If you're a leader, which is what an NFL quarterback has to be, when someone comes to you with something that is important to you and a way to help you accomplish something that is important to you to win, then a leader says, all right, let's sit down, let's talk about this, and let's get it done. They came to Colin Kaepernick, and he said, I ain't feeling it. I ain't feeling it. He's a fraud. He's a fake black man with a fake movement and a fake black girlfriend. He's a fake. Now, don't get me wrong, Nessa's cute, but she ain't black. And her judgment is questionable. Why are you out there sending out, while the Ravens are considering signing Colin Kaepernick, why are you sending out a tweet about Ray Lewis and the owner of the Ravens? Why would you do that if you want him to play? Maybe you don't want him to play. Maybe despite all the speculation, he really doesn't want to play. If he wanted to play, why would you walk away from a $14.5 million player option? Why would you leave $14.5 million on the table and go into free agency, knowing that your numbers weren't that good anymore? I mean, he didn't know. Excuse me. When you are a professional quarterback, you know about your numbers. You know whether or not you're an accurate passer. You know what your QB rating is. And you know whether or not you're getting better or getting worse. It's kind of the leverage you have going into contract negotiations when one contract is coming to an end and you're looking for another. Colin Kaepernick had to know that going into this season that just started, finishing up the 2016 season, that he was ranked 32 out of 35 with respect to passing percentage, completions, that is. He had to know that he ranked as the most inaccurate passer, pocket passer in the league. And he had to know that when you are someone whose passing numbers as a quarterback are in decline and you just were part of a team that went 2-14, your market value may not be that high. Would have made much more sense to take the $14.5 million from the San Francisco 49ers and then force them into a trade with someone for you if someone else saw that much value in you. Otherwise, you just hold the clipboard for $14.5 million, work on stuff, and get it together for a run next season when you don't have money guaranteed to come your way. That's what a smart rabbit would have done. That's what a rabbit with good judgment might have done. But we're talking about Colin Kaepernick. Now, back to Nessa. They've been dating, according to Hollywood Life, they have dated since 2015. They met in July, and they went public with their relationship in February of 2016. That's very interesting, because IB Times published in February of 2016 that transgender model Mia Isabella confirmed her Colin Kaepernick relationship, while Kaepernick, not surprisingly, remained quiet. Who is Mia Isabella? She is a transgender model. She is she's not he is a transgender model, a guy who made himself into a woman, and is also a porn star. Isn't that interesting? Now, they had a relationship that she has confirmed. I find that fascinating. Here's what she had to say about this in October of 2016 on the Jim and Sam show.
The other name that you get linked up with a lot, and it's especially been happening more because he's been in the news, is Colin Kaepernick.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something you're going to be addressing on the podcast? Is there a story to address there?
I'll take my time with that.
Yeah.
That's somebody that I respect extremely.
You actually have
care for extremely. I think he's an incredible person. The braveness that he's showing now, I admire, and I feel like I maybe had something to do with it, making him feel bold enough to be the kind of person he's become lately.
How did you do that?
We had a great friendship, great connection, and we talked a lot. I'll say that.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. I have a lot of friends. No one ever inspired me to not stand during the national anthem.
I'm working on it.
Well,
I've had a few that would inspire me to kneel.
Yeah, that's what she's talking about.
No, I do get linked to him a lot because during the Tyga situation, someone saw some kind of social media.
By the way, I should point out something that you were like, okay, I had this plan with Tyga, and it was
and I just
if we ever got exposed, we would just tell everybody that we were really good friends. Then I was like, hey, what about Colin Kaepernick? And you're like, well, I'll say we're just really good friends. I'm like, okay, well, that kind of explains that one away.
You can take it how you want it, I guess.
Right.
I'm probably turning red now, aren't I?
No.
It's okay.
You look very comfortable.
Yeah.
You look very confident in your assertion.
But you do? You think you inspired him to be bold?
He inspired me. I think even during the situation that I was going through, this was a person who made sure to keep in contact with me and made sure to kind of just make me feel like I could stand up to anything. And I think it was probably an important moment for him as well to see how the world was reacting to me and how people were kind of just really trashing me and how I was still trying my best to stand as tall and represent and protect people.
So that's what she had to say on the radio. In an IB Times article that was published in February of 2016, it says Isabella originally remained quiet about his love for Colin Kaepernick to protect him. I loved him very much and he cared for me greatly, but in order to protect his brand, I made him walk away from me. Now remember, he had already been hanging with Nessa Diab since July of the previous year. So this is what we get. On top of all the other things going on with Colin Kaepernick, he's bisexual or homosexual. Take your pick. Although there's really not a dime's worth of difference between the two. If I'm honest, Isabella said, I have not been very good to my own heart. I've burdened it with heavy truths too great for it to bear. Today I tell the truth. Now, this is the same guy who was caught up in the Tyga and Kylie Jenner cheating scandal. And that's, the guy said that he and Kaepernick were once in a romantic relationship. So he was a guy in a romantic relationship with another guy. The guy went public about it, and Colin Kaepernick has nothing to say because he's dating a non-black woman who's part of Black Lives Matter. No matter how you slice this, The nice thing about this entire ordeal is that when your stuff is raggedy and you try to push a non-issue, you regularly get exposed. This dude has been exposed. And now he's reduced to trying to sue somebody to give him a job as someone who produces nothing but wants multiple millions of dollars. He ain't that bright. He has lousy judgment. He's fake. He's a fake black guy hanging out with a fake black girl who was dating, and he was dating a guy while he was forming this relationship with the fake black girl. This is your hero. This is the GQ magazine Citizen of the Year. This is nonsense, is what it is. And now that he's exposed, I, for one, am going to make sure that no one quite forgets who Colin Kaepernick actually is. Now, I'll give you a proviso. Once he goes away and becomes quiet, I'll have nothing more to say about him. But as long as he wants to be in the public eye, I'll get to shine the light wherever I can find anything about him I wish to make known. Colin Kaepernick, bless your heart. You're anti-American. You're not really black. You're not really heterosexual. Maybe that doesn't matter to people. But you want to make an issue of a non-issue under false pretenses against my country, against first responders, and you want to try to represent black people when you ain't got nothing to do with it. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinkin'. We'll be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinkin' here on the dominant force in internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us, also WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia, WJHC, Talk 107.5 FM North Florida Talk Radio, FreedomInAmericaRadio.com, and WLBB News Talk AM 1330 in Carrollton, Georgia. Donald Trump just learned, if he didn't already know, a valuable lesson that those of us who are black probably already do know. There's a reason why you should never help Negroes. KNEE-GROWS. And LeVar Ball has put himself in that category. What am I speaking about? Well, as you know, LeAngelo Ball, the middle son of LeVar Ball and brother of Los Angeles Laker first-round draft pick Lonzo Ball, is a freshman at UCLA and on the basketball team, or at least he was. They went to China to play Georgia Tech in their season opener, and while they were there, LeAngelo Ball and two of his other teammates, also freshmen at UCLA, went on a shopping spree. They were in 3 stores, not one. Louis Vuitton is the one that people keep talking about, but they actually were arrested for going into 3 different stores and shoplifting, and all this is caught on surveillance tape, so there is no denying it. So, what happened after that? Well, one of the things that happened was they were questioned, then placed under arrest. And not surprisingly, LeVar Ball, LeAngelo's father, who was on his way to China to see the game, was asked what he thought about the ongoing issues, and they caught him while he was pushing his wife's wheelchair through what looked like an airport. Here was his interesting response.
LeVar, do you have any update on Leandro?
No, man, I ain't got nothing yet. I'm going to wait till I get some more intel what's going on, then I'll let y'all know what's up.
Do you have any concern, or do you think everything's going to be okay?
Yeah, it'll be fine. It'll be fine. Everybody making it a big deal. It ain't that big a deal.
So let me get this straight. Now, either you didn't know that your son had stolen, or you didn't know that your son had stolen from 3 high-end stores, and what he had committed was the equivalent of grand theft, grand larceny, felony larceny, simply because of the value of the items that were taken. Either you did not know that, or you condone that behavior. Those are the only 2 options. Either you didn't know what he had done, the extent of what he had done, or you think that that behavior is acceptable. That's all there is. There is no answer C, and there is no all of the above. And that tells you a lot about what you need to know regarding the character of LeVar Ball. Now, people will say he's a good father. I don't know anymore. If my mother heard, or my father heard, that I had gone someplace, even into a foreign country, and stolen from a store things that I did not even need, and that there was no doubt that I had done it, it would be a big deal. Would have been a big deal, always. Well, this happened to coincide with a trip the President of the United States was conducting on the Asian continent. He was in China when this occurred. And what we found out, because that conversation, or that little snippet from LeVar Ball, happened on the 8th of November. What we found out on the 13th of November was this.
Here's the very latest on the 3 UCLA players accused of shoplifting in China. The Washington Post reporting that President Trump has personally asked Chinese President Xi Jinping to help resolve the case. Xi reportedly promised Trump the players would be treated fairly. The players, including LiAngelo Ball, were released to their Chinese hotel last Wednesday, and there they remain.
So Donald Trump, who was under no obligation to say a word about this, he has nothing to do with this, decided to talk to President Xi of China, with whom he has built up a relationship. You may remember that the president of China was actually at Mar-a-Lago in Florida with the president at the time that he gave the order to launch all those missiles into that Syrian air base in response to the gas attack on Syrian civilians. And since that time, there has been a thaw in U.S.-Chinese relations. It looks better now than it did under the previous administration. What does that mean for America? I don't know. But one thing I do know that it means is that the President of the United States can ask a favor of the President of China on behalf of 3 wayward youths from America who commit a crime in China. And as a result of this request, the young men who could have spent time in a Chinese jail, and that would have been justified because there's no doubt of what they did, and China's system of justice operates differently than ours, and their conviction rate is north of 95%. So they were going to be convicted. The only question would have been how much time would they have served. Donald Trump asked the president of China to step in and help with the matter. And the president of China, who did not have any obligation to these young men at all, saw to it that they actually came home. UCLA has shown no backbone, in my opinion. They simply suspended the children indefinitely. I do call them children. They're not young men. I don't think they should be playing college basketball for UCLA. I'm not saying they shouldn't be playing college basketball. I don't think they should be on that team. I think they should have been removed from the team. Whether or not they removed from the school, I think their scholarship should have been revoked. And their ability to play basketball at UCLA should have been taken away. If they wanted to transfer to another school, I think that would be fine. If another school wants to pick them up and allow them to play, I think that's fine. But UCLA should have stood up and removed these kids from the program, and the university should have taken them out of the school. Unless you are trying to say that there's something appropriate in that behavior, let me ask you a question. Had some other scholarship student at UCLA that was not a basketball player had gone to China and stolen things from high-end stores, gotten caught and arrested, and then somehow or another made it back to the United States, do you think they'd be able to keep their academic or non-athletic scholarship? Do you think? I don't. And UCLA does have a history of removing people from their program who embarrass the university. If you do not think that this was an embarrassment to the university, well, there's treatment programs available for you. But now we have the most interesting development. And, of course, the criticism of Donald Trump always continues. Well, Donald Trump tweeted that he helped him. So, he did. He shouldn't have done that. He should have just let him thank him on his own. Well, they did thank him. It may have been prompted. I don't think it was the most sincere of thanks. The young men, when they got back to America, they were ushered off to a press conference where they read statements, and in those statements was, it seemed like, a not very sincere or heartfelt acknowledgement of Donald Trump and the U.S. government. A more accurate and sincere statement would have been thanking Donald Trump, President of the United States, and also thanking President Xi of China. That would have been appropriate. They didn't do that. But now what we have going on this past Sunday is LeVar Ball exhibiting some strange behavior and Donald Trump responding to him as someone who is being disrespectful. CBS News in Los Angeles reported it this way.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Peter Dowd. A war of words erupting between President Trump and LeVar Ball, and it's all over the arrest and release of Ball's son, UCLA basketball star LiAngelo Ball, and two fellow players in China. CBS 2's Greg Mills is live in Chino Hills with more on the exchange. Greg.
And, Peter, turns out this is just round one in this battle between the president and LeVar Ball. Now, the Balls live here in Chino Hills, a big house in the hills, which we'll show you. Just days after this UCLA basketball trio were freed from China's hold and allowed to come home, a behind-the-scenes basket brawl is on. And it's a top trender on Twitter today. Quick history. 3 UCLA players caught shoplifting in China, and the president helped spring them.
I'd also like to thank President Trump and the United States government for the help that they provided as well.
LiAngelo Ball and his now suspended teammates thanked the president. But when ESPN asked LiAngelo's dad about it, LeVar Ball replied, "Who? Everybody wants to make it seem like he helped me out." Well, President Trump tweeted, "Now that the 3 basketball players are out of China and safe from years in jail, LeVar Ball, the father of LiAngelo, is unaccepting of what I did for his son and that shoplifting is no big deal. I should have left him in jail." We went to the Balls' new home in a gated community in Chino Hills. And based on the license plate, I'm pretty sure that's LeVar's car. But nobody answered when I rang the doorbell, knocked, and even tried the squawk box out front.
no response. But down the hill at Chino Hills Brewing Company, lots of response. First, regarding LeVar Ball. Should LeVar Ball have expressed some gratitude to the president?
I think so. He should have expressed some gratitude as a father.
Absolutely. OMG.
Oh, he's got to respect that, it's an international situation, so you get help. And at the same time, the president probably should have said what he said. So, the way I look at it, they're both stupid in that regards.
And round two this afternoon, President Trump wrote back and said that LeVar Ball, very ungrateful in a tweet. He also reminded him that his son could have spent 5 to 10 years in jail for shoplifting in China. So this is not the end of this at all. Peter, back to you.
Oh, I'm sure it isn't, Greg. Thank you very much. Local Congressman Adam Schiff reacted on Twitter saying the president would have left American students in a foreign jail because their families didn't lavish sufficient praise on him. How can someone in such a big office be so small?
Let's deal with Representative Schiff first. And let's also deal with the National Review, Catherine Temp of the National Review. But let's start with Schiff. Donald Trump did not ask for praise before he did anything. He saw the situation, followed the reporting, why he did it. You'd have to ask him. And took advantage of the relationship he had with the president of China to intervene and have these young men released and sent home. And then he wondered aloud whether or not they would be grateful for what he had done. A thank you is not praise. It's a thank you. And that's all LeAngelo Ball did. And the president seemed to be cool with that. To say that he would have left them there because he wasn't praised would have implied that he would have asked that someone ask him to take action before he did. That didn't happen. Catherine Temp of the National Review said President Trump's effort to free LeAngelo Ball from a Chinese president was noble, but not extraordinary. It was his job. Really? No, it's not. It's not his job. Because if it was his job, then you're trying to say that the previous president did not do his job with respect to Otto Warmbier, who was left to die in North Korea. He didn't do his job with respect to an ex-Marine, Andrew Tamaresi, who was jailed in Mexico and left to twist in the wind for 7 months. A local congressman talked to the Mexican government on the former Marine's behalf, but the President of the United States and his administration said nothing. So if it was his job to get these 3 young men who committed a crime, the equivalent in America of a felony, if it was his job to get them out of China, why wasn't it Barack Obama's job to get Andrew Tamaresi out of Mexico and Otto Warmbier out of North Korea? So this is the thing where you get the double standard even from the press. What Donald Trump says is irrelevant. What he does is all that matters. He got him out. And had anybody done something like that for one of my children who found themselves in a situation where I did not have the power to resolve it, but they did, and though they were under no obligation to resolve it, they took action to help my child, oh, I'd know who that person is. I wouldn't be walking around saying who. And nobody else would have to talk about whether or not he helped me. I would say that he helped my child. Everything you want to know about LeVar Ball is tied up in this moment. I wanted to give him credit for being a good father. I can't do that anymore. I wanted to give him credit for being a decent man, I can't do that anymore either. I want to remind President Trump that going forward, you need to recognize who these people are. I'm not saying don't help them, but when you help those who fall into the category not of real black people, but of Negroes, don't expect anyone to acknowledge your good. They don't know how to do that. They're not people of character. They're just characters. Stanley, Levy, Black Man Thinkin'. We'll be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinkin', here on the dominant force in internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia. WJHC, Talk 107.5 North Florida Talk Radio. FreedomInAmericaRadio.com. And WLBB News Talk AM 1330, Carrollton, Georgia. Before I get into the final segment of the show, I do want to go back and remind people of certain things. Because there are a lot of people who are saying that Donald Trump only did this to get attention, which means they really don't understand or know anything about Donald Trump's history at all. Most of the things that he has done for people, he doesn't ask permission to do good, nor does he ask anything of them in return. In the case of the ball thing, all he asked for was, just thank the guy for doing something that no one else could do, because that's what you should do. There was obviously a problem in upbringing and behavior of these three guys, since they felt it was okay to go steal while in another country. My point is this. Donald Trump makes it very clear by his behavior, without regard to what he says, that his concern is more about those he helps than it is about himself. You may recall the Marine who drove into Mexico accidentally with guns and was held there for more than 7 months. And this happened under Barack Obama, and Obama didn't even so much as make a phone call to Mexico. That is how poisoned that relationship had become. But do you recall this?
Last night, sometime after On the Record ended and after I left the set, I began to get tweets and emails telling me that Donald Trump gave me a shout-out at his town hall meeting. Now, that could be good news or bad news, since we all know Donald takes no prisoners and his language can get pretty blunt. So I took the bait, though, and did ask some emailers, how was it? Now, here's what Donald said.
We don't have a good relationship with Mexico, right? Do we have a good relationship? Remember Sergeant Tamarisi, right? He kept him in jail. We couldn't get him in. We had a president who didn't even want to make a phone call. He was in that jail, rotting in that jail. And I helped him with Greta and some people, and I helped him financially. And finally, he got out, but he was in there so long. She was terrific. By the way, without her, you probably wouldn't even, he'd still be there.
Whew. Dodge that bullet. All nice from Donald. But in all seriousness, Donald did help out Sergeant Tamarisi. He sent him money to help him jumpstart his life. Sergeant Tamarisi rotted in a Mexican prison for 214 days. President Obama wouldn't even pick up the phone to help. And it wasn't, though, just Donald Trump who helped. Many of you, the On the Record viewers, also stepped up. You signed petitions. You made phone calls. You tweeted and posted on Facebook. It just goes to show we can all get things done if we all work together. And it was my honor to help that U.S. Marine. That's my off-the-record comment tonight. Good night.
That was Greta Van Susteren, and that was back during the campaign, August of 2016. If you honestly believe that Trump gave the guy money so that Trump could have attention, you really have TDS, or Trump Derangement Syndrome. There's really nothing else to say about you. If you think that tweeting about things that you do, if you so choose, when the things that you do are good, is somehow unbecoming of the office of the presidency, then you have a jacked up idea of what the presidency is all about. It's not about decorum. It's about helping the American people. And Donald Trump tends to help American people. Yeah. Moving on, last topic. Because the pressure on the Second Amendment does not stop, and with each tragic event, that pressure is going to return so long as you allow those who are progressives participate in the discussion. The discussion, let me make this clear. First of all, the discussion was ended in 1787. That's when the Constitution was written. It was ratified and put in place in 1789. The discussion has been over for more than 220 years. For people to revisit the discussion as though the right to bear arms, to keep and to bear arms, is somehow damaging to the country, they don't understand why there is a country. People keep looking at the Constitution as though it is a founding document of the United States of America, when the truth of the matter is the United States of America was already more than a decade old when they finished drafting and accepting the Constitution of the United States. The Constitution didn't found America. America was already founded when it went looking for a Constitution. It was already operating under the Articles of Confederation. It was founded by the Declaration of Independence. I don't know why people have a problem with that, but they do. Well, you know what? Actually, I do understand why they have a problem with that. Specifically with the Second Amendment. They don't have a problem with the First Amendment unless you're using it to espouse views that they dislike. They didn't have a problem with Colin Kaepernick taking a knee to protest police and oppression, but they had a problem when the American people turned their backs or began turning their backs on the NFL because of it. They thought that that somehow was infringing on his right to speak. You have a right to speak. You do not have a right to be heard. But the Second Amendment, above all the others in the Bill of Rights, is the one that guarantees the purpose of founding the nation, individual liberty. There's a difference between freedom and liberty. I can take you out from under the day-to-day control of another person, but that doesn't guarantee that you have the ability to do the things which you please, that are only dictated by conscience and whatever allegiance you have to the God who made you. It's that latter thing which is liberty. Well, what if we all agree that we need to have gun controls and reasonable, whatever reasonable means? Let me help you guys out for a minute. This is the text of the Second Amendment. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Forget that first part, because people keep focusing on the militia. The issue is the right. The right of the people to keep and bear arms. Notice how it didn't say to keep and bear flintlocks, to keep and bear muskets, to keep and bear. It simply says arms, as in armament, as in what is it that you need. If the people within a state are going to be free, they have to be able to keep and to bear arms whenever they determine that there is a threat to their freedom. It's only one sentence. There is no statement in there limiting armament, so everyone who has an idea, well, nobody needs this, that's not your call. And the Constitution makes it clear that it does not discriminate. It doesn't say what arms you can and cannot have. It says that you have the right to keep and bear them. Why is this a hill to die on, by the way? Ask North Korea, who has guns there. And then ask yourself, do they have liberty? Go to China. and see who has guns there. And tell me how much liberty you perceive. Go to Great Britain. See how many guns are there. Well, Great Britain, England is free. Really? So did you see the story that came out where the National Health Service has decided that if you smoke or if you are obese, you cannot have your surgery paid for by the National Health Service, even though you are paying money into the National Health Service, even though this is supposed to take care of all of British citizens. If you don't fit the government's profile as to who should have medical services, then you will not get them. Please and what recourse do they have? Because no one is armed. You can't compel them to do anything because only the government, even the police, not all the police carry guns. You have to have a special dispatch of a police officer who happens to have a gun to come out in England. The simplest way to say this is the following. When you do not have a gun, you are not in control of your situation. Now, that doesn't mean you have to have one. If you believe you can control your life and protect your liberty without a firearm, more power to you. But to tell somebody else that they shouldn't have one because it makes you uncomfortable, get that foolishness out of here. Well, there's so many guns. There's more guns in the United States than people. What's your point? Guns do so much. Most of the homicides that happen with guns are suicide, like 2/3. And do you honestly think if they didn't have a gun and you're out to kill yourself that there's no other way to do it? If you got rid of guns, you think all those suicides would not occur? Get out. Get out. What about all those mass killings? Let me help you guys out. More than 2.5 million people die in the United States every year of all kinds of causes. Gun violence is well down the list of leading causes of death. When you put it all together, not even a tenth of the deaths in the U.S. every year occur because of guns. Because that would be 200,000. We don't see 200,000 gun deaths a year. It's not happening. The guns are not the problem. The people who decide that they will have guns whether you regulate them or not because they are criminally minded, those are the ones who are the problem. Criminalizing guns is like criminalizing anything else, like when you criminalized alcohol. That simply meant everybody who had alcohol was a criminal. It didn't stop them from drinking. It didn't stop them from distributing. As a matter of fact, without prohibition and the money that enterprise generated, John Kennedy would have never been president because the only way his father got all that money was he was a bootlegger par excellence. But that's a digression. You need a gun, if you want one, to ensure that your liberty is going to be maintained, not to be bullied by you or from you, not to be infringed by a majority. One of my favorite quotes attributed to Ben Franklin remains, "Democracy is 2 wolves and a lamb voting on what to have for lunch. Liberty is a well-armed lamb protesting the vote." I am for liberty. What about the crazies? I'm sorry, the crazy people have the right to defend their liberty as well. They might hurt somebody. Then when they pull a gun, shoot them. But you don't tell them that they don't have the same rights as everybody else because of what you fear they might do. You don't do that to people. You've been doing that in Chicago, and you're stacking bodies like cordwood. because good people who are law-abiding can't have a gun in Chicago. Notice how everywhere progressivism holds sway, people are just walking targets, unable to defend themselves, depending upon the police to protect them, and the police show up first to draw a chalk outline where they find you, and then to conduct an investigation in hopes that they determine who killed you. It's not liberty. And if the government becomes the only part of society, whether police or military, whatever, that is armed, then there is no way to resist the government. Had there been no way to resist George III, you would not have a nation. And just because a bunch of colonists had what weapons they had, they were able to defeat in a 7-year war the most powerful military on the planet at that time. It is about liberty. That's all it's about. That's all it will ever be about. You die on that hill because it is better to live on your feet. To die on your feet rather than to live on your knees. And that's our show. God bless you. God keep you. Looking forward to seeing you next week. Until then, do take care.
You've been listening to Black Man Thinkin' with your host, Stan Levy. Join Stan midnight to 2 a.m. That's late Monday night into early Tuesday morning. And find him on the web at Black Man Thinkin' without the G. That's blackmanthinkin.com.